Now, let me tell you why we've already won, folks. Let me tell you why we've already won. We have already won because we are part of a national movement that recognizes we can never incarcerate our way out of poverty.
Okay. Joining me now, my friend Mike Slater, of course, the first very own Mike Slater. He has a great special coming out this Friday on America's declining birth rate. Mike, Chesa Boudin. People don't know who this guy is. I don't know who this guy is. Where'd he come from?
Oh, this guy, he's one of the worst. So he's one of the wokest DAs in the country. Quick DA hired by the people to prosecute criminals on behalf of the law-abiding citizens. We elected these people, these woke DAs, because of George Soros. We'll get to him in a minute. And they don't prosecute crime. That's why we see crime spiking and all the rest. Chesa Boudin, one of the worst. When he was 14 months old, both of his parents were members of the Weather Underground. They're both domestic terrorists, and they were a part of a robbery of an armored truck, a Brinks armored money truck, right? There was a whole chase. They ended up stealing $1.6 million. There was a whole police chase. 2 police officers ended up dying because of this melee. The woman, the mom, his mom was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She got out and she went on to be a professor at Columbia University, Ivy League school in New York City. His dad got 75 years plus 40 years. So he was gonna spend the rest of his life in prison. But Chuck Schumer, the very last thing he did in office was parole him right before he left. So he's now out of prison. I think his mom just died like a couple months ago or whatever. This is Chesa Boudin. He was raised by Bill Ayers, the head of the Weather Underground. His first job out of college was working for Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. This guy dyed in the wool, proud communist who's the prosecutor in San Francisco. By trade, he's a defense attorney. So he works on behalf, in his mind, of the criminals, because this is the most important thing. To the progressive mindset, the criminals are the victims. So whenever a criminal commits a crime, they're actually the victims, not the people who are the real life victims. This is so hard for conservatives to understand. And Justin, let me say one more thing about this idea, because it's so incredibly important. 2 things to note here. From a progressive worldview, first, we're all criminals, Jesse. We're all capitalists, which is a criminal enterprise. We're all beneficiaries of imperialism, which is crime. We're all a little bit criminals, aren't we? Right? Second thing to note, the Marxist worldview, everything's about power. So law was about rich white and capitalist imperialist men imposing their power on the poor, vulnerable masses. So the law is unjust. Therefore, we're not going to prosecute people under the law because it is an expression of power. So we've had in San Francisco, to finish up this story, he's halfway through his term of implementing this in San Francisco. And even in San Francisco, it was too much. And they recalled him, and last night, 61% of the people in San Francisco voted to kick him out of office. So that's the quick of the story of Chesa Boudin. But there are these George Soros-funded DAs across the entire country. 1/5 of the population lives in an area with a George Soros-funded woke DA just as bad as Chesa Boudin. There's 75 across the country that we still need to recall and get out of office.
Okay, before we get to Soros, which we'll get to him in a second, I would never have thought in a million years San Francisco, of all places, would recall it. There has to be more to this story on the ground. Who got this thing rolling? What's going on, Mike?
Yeah, so there were a bunch of these stories. I mean, we've all seen the videos of the smash and grabs and people going into Walgreens and just emptying the shelves. We've all seen that. And it's one thing to say, oh, these DAs aren't prosecuting the quote unquote little crimes, right? The shoplifting and stuff like that. And they're not. And I think that's a huge deal. I don't think it's a little crime. It's a huge quality of life issue. They're also not prosecuting the big crimes. So one of the big ones that really got his recall started was January 2021. There were 2 women walking down the street New Year's. They got hit by a car. The guy driving the car, it's a stolen car. He's been arrested 5 times that year. His most recent arrest was an armed carjacking. And every time he got out, he wasn't charged because crimes or laws are unjust, right? He's the real victim here. So then he ended up killing these 2 women, right? And there's tons of those stories, like the big ones. And the people of San Francisco had enough, in particular, the Asians in San Francisco, who until recently have not been that politically engaged, but just a couple months ago, kicked out the entire, or almost the entire, San Francisco school board because of some things, super woke, far left, anti-Asian things that they've done as well. So I think you see the Asian community stepping up a little more. But even the people of San Francisco have had enough. Now, I don't think they've learned their lesson. I think they'll probably elect another woke DA, maybe just a little less woke, though.
Don't miss Jesse Kelly Breaks History, Che Guevara, the latest episode of a new series available now exclusively for First TV supporters. Visit the First TV app or thefirsttv.com to subscribe and start watching today.